Good morning, church. I have been blessed by this sermon series. Have you? I heard like 3 people there. I'm not trying to convince you to be blessed by it. Maybe you're just not listening. This sermon series, we've been talking about mountains, the mountains of the Bible, and what we can learn from them regarding our walk with Christ. And last week, I believe it was Mount Zion. I was listening to that. That was a blessing. This morning, we're talking about a different mountain. I'd like to start by telling you something about me. When I was a child, my parents would take me to North Carolina at least once a year. And we lived in South Florida, okay? So we would normally go there sometime in the fall or sometime in December to get away from South Florida. When we were in North Carolina, we would do all sorts of things. We would, I remember going to a place called Santaland. Anybody been there? One? Okay. Anybody heard of it and not been there? You just did. I just told you about it. No. All right, so one. Santaland is like a small little, well, I'm not, it's what it sounds like it is, right? It's a Christmas theme park that's small. We would also go to Gatlinburg, which was in Tennessee. There was a lot of things to do in North Carolina and Tennessee. You'd probably think that because I'm telling you about my childhood, that I would pick Santaland or Gatlinburg or one of those things as being my favorite thing of going there to that area, but it actually wasn't. Every time we went to the mountains, we hiked. And I'm not talking about hiking like you can do here, okay? Go down to a park and take a hike at a park, because that's flat land, right? Mainly, we would hike up mountains that were where my parents had lived, near where my parents had lived, or not lived, but had a small home. And that was what I enjoyed the most, was hiking those mountains. And the mountain I enjoyed hiking the most was a mountain called Cold Mountain. Now, as you can tell, I've already asked for audience participation, congregation participation. I'll ask again. Anybody heard of Cold Mountain? No? They made a movie about it. They wrote a book about it. Probably wasn't very good and did clearly, because you haven't heard about it. But it was Cold Mountain, and I assure you that you'd spend your time better hiking that mountain than reading that book or watching that movie. So it was an all-day affair to go up and down Cold Mountain, but it was definitely worth it. It seemed that when we hiked, we'd always go a different route to get up. At least that's what I remember. My dad might have thought otherwise, but we were going a different route, so we'd be able to see different parts of the mountain. And it was just an incredible hike. But the best part you can imagine was where? At the top. The best part of that mountain was definitely the top of the mountain. And when you get to the top, at least when you get to the top of a mountain, okay, at least one the size of Cold Mountain. And let me show you a picture. Let me see. There we go. So it's up here. I know it's blurry. What do you get online? My dad probably had a better one, but picture right there, that's the top. And when you get to a top of a mountain that size, it's a transforming experience, a true transforming experience to look out miles and miles of the majesty of creation that God made. And it transforms your perspective. It transforms your perspective on so much in your life if you allow it to. And you know, almost 2,000 years ago, there was an event that took place on a mountain that can at least be described as transforming. The Bible doesn't give us the name of this mountain. We just call it the Mount of Transfiguration. And there is so much for us to learn about the experiences that Jesus had when he was here on earth. But when you look at this story, which only covers very few verses in the Bible, there is still so much to gain when we focus on this, on the Bible verses about the Mount of Transfiguration. So let's go to what the Bible says. Let's see here. Oh, too far. There we go. Matthew 17, 1 through 8. Okay? Now, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Let's see, here we go. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud, saying, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. But Jesus came and touched them and said, Arise and do not be afraid. When they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Now that's it. We just read it. Now, it's not only in Matthew, it's in Mark, and it's in Luke, but that's basically what took place on the Mount of Transfiguration, again, what we call it. But in these few verses that we read, there's so much to gain from it. In fact, when we do a sermon series like this, I hope, and my prayer is for each one of us here to hear these sermons and say, man, I've read that before and I didn't get that. Do you have that? When you hear a sermon and you're like, I've read that before, but I didn't get that. Why? Because we're all witnesses to each other. We all experience different things in our life. Christ is walking with each one of us and shows him to us in all different ways. And so when we hear something like this, we've heard it before and we say, well, here's what I get from it. Well, maybe you should read it again and see what Christ has for you, what more Christ has for you from each verse that the Bible has to give us. So let's learn some lessons here this morning. First, what's the first lesson we can take from this? Let's see. No one is like Jesus. No one is like Jesus. You see, prior to this event, Jesus had healed all sorts of diseases prior to the Mount of Transfiguration. He had cast out demons. He had raised the dead. He had fed thousands with very little food. And he walked on water. So you would think that by now, Peter, James, and John would know that Jesus was like no other. Right? You guys seem asleep today. Christ is here with us. Let's allow him to open our hearts and minds to his word, okay? Amen? Amen. So, right before this happens in Matthew, we read that Jesus is asking his disciples some questions. And he asks one of his disciples, who do you say that I am? Now, who answers? Peter answers. And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, that's a bold statement. And it tells me that at least at that point you'd think, again, Peter knew that Christ was like no other. He was the Son of God. But then what did Peter say on the mount? He says, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Let us make one tabernacle for you? No. Let us make three. Let us make three. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Peter suggests that there should be three shrines for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, as if making them equal. Now, Mark and Luke include the detail that Peter was so frightened, he didn't know what he was saying. But he said it. He said it. Now, sometimes we glorify people. Sometimes we glorify people. We put people on pedestals. Now, I remember when I was younger, my older sister, who was at the time a teenager, because I was younger, had pictures on her wall. You saw the picture when I went past it. There you go. Now, that's not a picture of my sister's wall. I'm going to be fair, okay? I found this online. I don't have a picture of my sister's wall. Maybe my dad does. But when she was, this is basically, does anybody know who this group is? Come on, somebody's got to. New Kids on the Block, okay? This is a group popular in the early 90s. So, New Kids on the Block. And my sister's wall looked somewhat similar, okay? She had posters like this on the wall. And you have to understand, we glorify people, right? But you may look at this and say, well, I don't have pictures on the wall, and I've never had pictures on the wall. But what we do is we join fan clubs, and we join podcasts, and what we do is while we may not think that the people we follow, because we also follow people, right? Instagram, Twitter, whatever, we follow people. But we may not think that the people we follow are perfect, because you may say, well, I don't put them on a pedestal, I don't put them next to Christ. But we do spend our time watching them, right? Or listening to them, or reading what they have to say. And I'm not saying that reading a book, belonging to a fan club, or a podcast is wrong. However, the question you must ask yourself is this: if Jesus is like no other, which he is, then shouldn't we spend more time with him than we do others? Are we spending 10 minutes on prayer and Bible study while we watch hours on end of our favorite show with our favorite actor or TV or movie, or listen to hours on end of our favorite podcast, or read our favorite author? You must ask yourself, do I really set Jesus apart in my life, and does it show? Because God the Father made it clear, right? This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. This was the Father's response to, let us make Jesus, Moses, and Elijah equal. No. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. Jesus is the Son of God. He is not a created being like Moses and Elijah and like the disciples themselves. He is set apart. He is holy. And we should treat him that way. Amen? Now, let's move on to the next lesson that we can learn. This teaches us that we can learn, and we should learn, from others' past experiences. Now, hold on 1 second. Takes a moment. There you go. Ellen White says, at the Transfiguration, the Lord sent Moses and Elijah to talk with Jesus concerning his sufferings and death. Instead of choosing angels to converse with his Son, God chose those who had themselves experienced the trials of earth. It's very amazing, that thought. Have you thought about that? Why was it Moses and Elijah that he picked? There's a couple reasons. We'll go over them, but this one is interesting. There was a 16-year-old man, or boy, named William. He left home to seek his fortune. His earthly possessions were tied in a bundle carried in his hand. One day he met an elderly canal boat captain who listened to his story and that his family was too poor to keep him. This is a 16-year-old boy. And the only skill he had was making candles and soap. Now the old captain knelt and prayed for the boy's future and afterward gave him some advice. He said, "William, someone will be the leading soap maker in New York. It could be you. Be a good man, give your heart to Christ, pay the Lord all that belongs to him, make an honest soap, give a full pound, and I'm certain you'll be a prosperous and rich man." Do you know who William was? William was, oh, man, this jumps. Come on, there you go, Colgate. William Colgate. That's who that was. Now, you may say soaps and perfume. I don't know. Maybe if that canal boat captain didn't open his mouth, I wouldn't have brushed my teeth this morning with the same toothpaste. Because that's Colgate, basically. He was making soaps and things, and he also got into dental care. The 16-year-old boy who listened to godly counsel was this man, who not only prospered beyond his wildest dreams, but he was able to give millions of dollars to the Lord's cause. You see, he listened to what the canal boat captain had to say. He listened to the words of wisdom from the Word, the godly words of wisdom. We all have people in our lives that have experienced something that we haven't. Moses and Elijah had experienced the trials of earth, and in his wisdom, God the Father sent these two men to minister to his Son. And we don't know exactly what was said, but we know that it was helpful. It was the will of God for Jesus to hear from Moses and Elijah, and Jesus gained something from that meeting. We'll probably find out when we talk to him in heaven. We are all tempted at times to go it alone, right? To not listen to the wisdom of others. However, there are times that God puts people in our lives to give us wisdom and encouragement. And we should not reject these people that are trying to help us. Now, there may be times that someone is trying to give you advice that is not from God, and that is the time that you do what the Bible tells you to do. You check everything according to the Word. It's as simple as that. If somebody is trying to give you advice and you see it to be godly advice according to the Word, according to the Bible, then you take that advice. Because we are not an island, right? God helps us not only through our own study of the Bible and through prayer, but through the witness of others. Now, the Transfiguration teaches us another thing. Come on. There we go. God holds the power over death. We were talking about that this morning in lesson, about why Adam and Eve didn't die on the spot when they partook of the fruit. Now, I'm not going to get too much into that, but the reason why is because God holds the power over death. You see, there's meaning and significance behind Moses and Elijah being there on the mount, and it goes beyond just the fact that they had words of wisdom for Christ. You see, Ellen White says, Moses was present, representing those who will be raised from the dead at the second coming of Christ. Why? Because Moses actually did die, right? The Bible tells us that Moses did die. And Elijah, who was translated to heaven without seeing death, we know that, right? Represented those who will be living on earth at the time of Christ's second appearing, and who will be changed from mortal to immortal and be translated to heaven without seeing death. And it is this way because God has the power over death. You see, 1 Corinthians tells us, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." Amen? Who holds the power over death? Christ does. He is the victor. Now, in the book of Jude, we read, come on, work. There we go. In Jude 9, we read, "Yet Michael, the archangel, in contending with the devil, when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" You see, Satan thinks he can prevent Jesus from taking the body of Moses here. Satan thinks that he has the power over those who have experienced the first death. But Christ doesn't waste any time with argument, does he? No. "The Lord rebuke you" is all that is said, because that's all that needs to be said when one has the power. There's no point in argument. There's no need. So we see here that we know that Christ took the body of Moses. How do we know that? Well, we saw him on the Mount of Transfiguration after this took place. And Jesus also had Elijah there, which is proof that Jesus has the power to keep someone from experiencing the first death. Amen? Moses and Elijah together was God's large message to all of us that I have the victory over death. Believe in me. Amen? Again, you guys seem so tired this morning. I'm talking about everlasting life. I'm talking about you guys living forever. And it sounds like you're already asleep. It sounds like you're already experiencing that first death right now. God is good? Okay. He can keep you from death? Is that good? Amen. Amen. There's another thing that we can learn from the Mount of Transfiguration. That is, God keeps His promises. God answers prayers. Now, we heard last week from Brother Darrell how God heard his prayer. His brother was moments from death. Moments. Now, if you haven't heard this story, you can talk to him. But what I'd recommend is you go listen to it online. Just listen to the whole sermon. You'll get the gist if you didn't hear it last week. But God heard his prayer and saved his brother's life. He hears, he answers promises, answers prayers. He keeps his promises. Now, let me tell you a different story. We know the story. Moses just spent 40 years in the wilderness with the Israelites, a people that complained so much that it would drive you crazy in 40 minutes, let alone 40 years. Okay? Moses is frustrated and he disobeys God. What does he do? He does what to the rock? He strikes the rock. What was he told to do? He's told to speak to the rock, but he disobeys God and he strikes the rock. And because of that disobedience, God tells Moses that he will not be able to go into the promised land. Now Moses is distraught because he just spent 40 years with people that would drive you crazy. And he doesn't get the reward. So he lets us in on this conversation that he has with God in Deuteronomy 3. But the Lord was angry with me on your account, right? Speaking to the Israelites, knowing that they're going to read this. And would not listen to me. So the Lord said to me, enough of that. Speak no more to me of this matter. Now, for a moment, this reminds me of conversations I've had with my children, where they keep bothering me about things. And I'm like, just stop. I mean, I've said no. The answer's no. It's not going to happen, right? And you can see that, and it brings it home to you, kind of. God the Father speaking to one of his children, like, you're not going to. You disobeyed me. Go up to the top of Pisgah and lift your eyes toward the west, the north, the south, and the east. And behold it with your eyes, for you shall not cross over this Jordan. But command Joshua and encourage him and strengthen him, for he shall go over before this people, and he shall cause them to inherit the land which you will see. Now, God tells Moses that he will not enter the promised land. He will only see it, right? And this is because of his sin. Yet when in Egypt, God tells Moses the following. When in Egypt, in Exodus, it tells us, and I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. Now, does God break promises? Does this seem like a promise? Yes. It seems as if God did not keep his promise to Moses about the promised land. But God keeps his promises to us, even if it happens in death, or even if it comes to completion hundreds of years later. When Moses came down to the mountaintop of Transfiguration, the prayer and the promise was answered. It was answered. Moses was where? He was in the promised land, looking out over the promised land. Ellen White tells us, upon the Mount of Transfiguration, Moses was present with Elijah, who had been translated. They were sent as bearers of light and glory from the Father to his Son, and thus the prayer of Moses, uttered so many centuries before, was at last fulfilled. He stood upon the goodly mountain, within the heritage of his people, bearing witness to him in whom all the promises to Israel centered. Isn't that amazing? He keeps his promises. You just don't understand how sometimes or when. There are many promises made in the Bible, some that are made to each one of us as children of God. And these promises are made for our good, and they are to better us in our relationship with him. And sometimes we pray for God to answer our prayers according to his promises in his word, but we don't see the prayer answered in our time. We don't see it happen. Does that mean that God didn't hear our prayer or make the promise? No. You see, we should claim the promises of God. However, we are to keep in mind that we should ask for God's promises according to his will and according to his time. According to his time. Moses saw the promised land as God had promised him, but he definitely didn't imagine how that was going to take place, right? Can you imagine it? Moses, when he knew God was going to keep his promise, but when he was up on top of that mountain, what he could have imagined as to how that promise was kept. Do you think he was disappointed? I don't think so. Our faith in God must extend to having faith that he will answer our prayers and keep his promises, but only according to his will and only according to his time. Now, lastly, the Transfiguration teaches us that we must go. Going back to what Peter said when he was on the mount, "Lord, it is good for us to be here." Charles Spurgeon once wrote, "How selfish the one thought it is good for us." What was to be done for the rest of the 12 and for the other disciples and for the wide, wide world? I'm sure it was comforting and satisfying to be transfigured and to speak with Moses and Elijah. I'm talking about Christ. But Jesus had work to do. He couldn't remain on the mountain and forego what was to come. We are blessed to have mountaintop experiences in the presence of God. But Scripture tells us that we cannot stay there. Acts 1 Come on, you can do it. There we go. Says, and while they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel. Now, what am I taught? What is this about? Before I finish. This is Jesus' ascension, okay? This is after the resurrection. This is his ascension, his final goodbye until he comes back again. And who are these 2 men? Angels. Who also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus who is taken up from you into heaven will so come in like manner as you saw him go into heaven. Stop standing there. Go. I know Jesus' presence was so many different things. Comforting, joyful. But he's gone. He'll be back. Go. Stop staring up into space, right? Do what he told you to do in Matthew. And Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. You see, the body of Christ has work to do at the foot of the mountain. You and I are called by God to fulfill this great commission. We receive from God not to keep to ourselves, but to share with others. Now, in closing, the Greek verb used for transfiguration is metamorpho. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I may be wrong. It's not metamorphosis because I'm talking about the Greek, okay? It ends with P-H-O-O, so I'm guessing it's foo. Metamorpho. Which is where we get the word metamorphosis. It means to change into another form, to transform, to transfigure. Now we are called to change into another form. God willing and our allowing, we have a glorified body that God has planned for each one of us. But we first must allow the more important change to take place, and that is the change of character. We must be transformed to have the mind and heart of Christ. And there are times in your life that you experience a moment, and it is a defining moment for you. A moment that you can choose to ignore, or a moment that you can choose to embrace. Jesus may be calling you right now to accept his invitation. An invitation to transform from a life devoted and focused on this world to a life that is devoted and focused on him. And if he's calling you now, don't put him off. Now may be that time for you, a time for change. Amen? We have a closing song, I believe.